I stood outside the Sapphire Lounge, smelling of varnish, watching my grandson celebrate on my dime, $15,000 to be exact. "You're not on the list," the hostess sneered. She didn't realize I held the blueprints to their lives, and I was about to pull the load-bearing beam. Before I tell you how I collapsed their fake house with one call, hit subscribe. This isn't just revenge. It's about reinforcing self-worth when rot destroys the family foundation. My name is Robert Johnson. I have spent 45 years of my life understanding how things hold together. I know that a dovetail joint, when cut with patience and precision, will outlast the carpenter who made it. I know that white oak resists rot because its cellular structure is closed, while red oak drinks up moisture like a sponge and decays from the inside out. And standing there in the drizzling Seattle rain, staring at the illuminated facade of the Sapphire Lounge, I knew exactly what I was looking at. I was looking at red oak disguised as marble. I was looking at a structure that was rotting from the inside. The rain in Seattle does not wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. It was a Thursday evening, and the city lights blurred against the wet pavement like oil on water. I adjusted the collar of my tweed jacket. It was an old jacket, older than my daughter, woven from wool that smelled faintly of sawdust and beeswax no matter how many times I had it dry cleaned. It was the uniform of a man who worked with his hands, a man who respected the material more than the image. The Sapphire Lounge was the kind of place Marcus loved. It sat in the trendy part of downtown, all glass and steel and aggressive lighting. From the sidewalk, it looked impressive. It screamed exclusivity. But as I walked up the steps, my eyes did what they always do. I looked for the flaws in the construction. I stopped at the main entrance. The doors were massive, towering things that were supposed to look like solid Honduran mahogany. To the untrained eye, they were majestic. To me, they were a lie. I ran my thumb along the bottom rail. It was smooth. Too smooth. There was no grain texture, just the slick, plastic feel of a high-pressure laminate veneer. I looked closely at the corner where the rail met the stile. A hairline crack was visible in the finish. The wood underneath had moved, expanded with the humidity. But the synthetic finish had not. It was peeling. They had used cheap pine or maybe even particle board for the core, wrapped it in a fraction of an inch of expensive-looking veneer, and sealed it shut. It was designed to look good for 5 years and then be thrown in a dumpster. It was the architectural equivalent of my son-in-law. I pushed the fake wood open and stepped into the foyer. The air inside was conditioned to a sterile chill and smelled of lilies and expensive gin. The noise of the city was cut off instantly, replaced by the low hum of conversation and the clinking of crystal. A hostess stood behind a podium that was lit from within. She was young, beautiful in a terrifyingly symmetrical way, and she looked at me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Her gaze flicked down to my scuffed work boots. I had polished them, but the leather was scarred from years of dropped chisels and heavy lumber, and then up to my face. She made a calculation in less than a second. I was an error in her perfectly curated evening. "Good evening, sir," she said. Her voice was professional, apologetic, and practiced. It was the voice of someone about to deliver bad news that they did not actually feel bad about. "The restaurant is fully booked for a private event tonight." "I know," I said. My voice sounded rough in the quiet space, like sandpaper on raw cedar. "I am here for the birthday party, the Johnson and Sterling party." She tapped a manicured fingernail on the tablet screen embedded in the podium. The light from the screen illuminated her face from below, giving her a ghostly appearance. She scrolled. Then she scrolled again. She looked up, her smile tightening just a fraction. "I am sorry, sir. That is a closed guest list. May I have your name?" "Robert Johnson," I said. "I am the grandfather." She typed it in. She waited. She shook her head. "I am afraid I do not have a Robert Johnson on the list." "Sir, The capacity is strictly limited to 80 guests due to fire codes, and every seat is accounted for. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. It was the same feeling I got when I was restoring an antique chair and discovered that the main leg was eaten through by termites, the sudden realization that the damage went deeper than the surface. "Check again," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am Leo's grandfather. I paid for the event." She did not check again. She just gave me a look of pity mixed with annoyance. "The list is finalized. Mr. Johnson, I cannot let you in if you are not on the list. Security is very tight." I looked past her shoulder. The foyer was separated from the main dining room by a wall of tempered glass. Through it, I could see the party. It was a sea of black ties and cocktail dresses. 80 people. I scanned the room, ignoring the strangers, looking for the one person who mattered. Then I saw him. Leo was sitting at a round table near the center. He was wearing a miniature tuxedo that looked stiff and uncomfortable. He was 9 years old, a boy who loved dirt and building blocks and the smell of fresh-cut pine. In that suit, he looked like a doll. He was not eating. He was looking around the room, his head turning left and right, his eyes wide and anxious. He was looking for me. I knew it as surely as I knew the grain of a piece of walnut. We had a ritual. Whenever he was in a room full of strangers, he would find me, and I would give him a wink, a signal that he was safe, that his grandpa was there to hold up the roof if the walls came down. He was searching for his anchor, and I was on the wrong side of the glass. My hand went to my pocket, brushing against the phantom sensation of a checkbook that was no longer there. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. 2 weeks ago, the memory hit me with the force of a mallet. I was in my workshop, the converted barn behind my small house. The air was filled with the smell of sawdust and the sharp tang of steel. I was standing in front of my Altendorf F-45. It was a sliding table saw, a German masterpiece made in 1990. I had bought it brand new, saving for 3 years to afford it. It was the heart of my shop. It was precise to the 1/10 of a millimeter. We had built cabinets, tables, gazebos, and entire libraries together. It was not just a tool. It was an extension of my will. But Marcus had come to me with that desperate look in his eyes, the one he tried to mask with business jargon. "Cash flow issues," he had said. "Liquidity crunch." He told me that if they did not throw this party, this lavish networking event disguised as a birthday, his investors for Apex Horizons would lose confidence. He needed $15,000. Not a loan, he said. An investment in Leo's future. I did not have $15,000 in liquid cash sitting around. My wealth was in my tools, my woodstock, and the small pension that barely covered my utilities. But I looked at the photos of Leo on my workbench. I sold the Altendorf. I sold it to a young cabinet maker in Tacoma for $12,000, and I scraped together the remaining $3,000 from my emergency fund. I remember handing the keys to the saw over to the new owner. I remember patting the cast iron table one last time, cold and solid under my hand. It felt like selling a limb. I wrote the check to Elena, $15,000. I handed it to her, and she hugged me, tears in her eyes, promising that this would fix everything, that this party would secure their future. And now, standing in the foyer of the Sapphire Lounge, I realized I had sold my heart to pay for a party I was not allowed to attend. "Get my daughter," I said to the hostess. "Sir, I cannot disturb the get my daughter." I did not shout. I did not need to. I used the voice I used when a junior apprentice was about to cut a board without measuring. It was a voice of absolute authority. The hostess swallowed. "I will see if Mrs. Sterling is available." She signaled a waiter through her headset. I waited. I watched through the glass. I saw the waiter whisper to Elena. She was standing near the head table, wearing a silver dress that shimmered under the lights. She went pale. She looked toward the entrance, saw me standing there in my tweed jacket, and she flinched. It was a small movement, a slight recoil, but I saw it. She said something to Marcus, who was holding a glass of champagne and laughing with a man in a gray suit. Elena walked toward the glass doors. She moved quickly, her head down, avoiding eye contact with the guests. She pushed through the doors into the foyer, bringing a burst of noise and laughter with her before the heavy glass sealed it off again. "Dad," she said, breathless. She stopped 5 feet away from me. She did not hug me. She did not smile. She looked at my boots. "What are you doing here?" "I am here for my grandson's birthday," I said. "The hostess says I am not on the list." Elena twisted the diamond ring on her finger. It was a nervous habit she had developed since marrying Marcus. "Oh, there must be a mistake. The event planner. They must have messed up the spreadsheet. It is chaos in there, Dad. Absolute chaos." "Then fix it," I said. "Tell her I am your father. Tell her to let me in." "It is not that simple," she said, her voice rising in a panic. "The fire marshal, the capacity is strict. We are already 2 people over." "Elena," I said. "I paid for this party. I wrote the check. $15,000. You told me I was the guest of honor." She flinched again. "I know, Dad, I know, and we are so grateful, but—" The doors opened again. Marcus stepped out. He brought a smell of expensive cologne and arrogance with him. He adjusted his silk tie, smoothing it over his chest. He smiled. But it was the same smile the hostess had used, fake, polished, and dismissive. "Robert," he said, nodding. "Good to see you. Listen, we have a bit of a situation." "The situation," I said, "is that I am standing in the hallway while my grandson is celebrating with my money." Marcus stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. He put a hand on my shoulder. I looked at his hand. His fingers were soft, manicured. They had never held a hammer, never felt the resistance of oak against a chisel. I shrugged his hand off. "Dad," he said, stretching the word out. He thought made him sound endearing, though he butchered the tone. "Look, let us be realistic. This isn't really a kid's party. It is a networking event for Apex Horizons. We have the vice president of zoning here. We have potential investors from overseas." He gestured vaguely at my outfit. "You know how these people are. They are superficial. If they see you, well, frankly, Robert, you look like you just came from a job site. It breaks the illusion. It disrupts the brand narrative we are trying to build for Leo's future." I looked at him. I looked at my daughter. She was studying the marble floor, refusing to meet my eyes. "The brand narrative," I repeated. "Exactly," Marcus said, thinking he had won. "We are building a legacy for Leo. We need to project success. Your contribution made this possible. Robert, you are the silent partner, the foundation, and foundations, well, they are underground, right? They are not visible." The metaphor hung in the air. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was speaking my language. He was telling me that my place was in the dirt, buried, holding them up while they shined in the light. I looked through the glass, one last time. Marcus's words had stripped away the last layer of varnish. I saw the truth. I was not a guest. I was not a father. I was not a grandfather. I was a resource. I was a wallet to be emptied and discarded. Inside, I saw Marcus's mother, a woman who had never worked a day in her life, walk up to Leo. She grabbed his shoulder and steered him toward a man with a camera. She forced a smile onto her face and squeezed Leo's arm until he smiled too. It was a grimace, not a smile. They were using him. They were using my boy as a prop to sell condos that hadn't been built yet. The anger that rose in me was not hot. It was cold. It was the temperature of liquid nitrogen. It was the focus I felt when I was about to make a critical cut on a piece of irreplaceable timber. Measure twice. Cut once. I looked at Marcus. He was smiling, expecting me to nod, to say, "I understand," to walk away and go back to my empty house like a good, obedient servant. I nodded, but it was not the nod of submission. It was the nod of a man who has finished his assessment and decided that the structure is beyond saving. It was the nod of a demolition expert. "I understand perfectly, Marcus," I said. My voice was steady, void of any emotion. "You are right. The foundation should not be seen," Marcus exhaled, relieved. "Thanks, Robert. You are a lifesaver. We will have a private dinner next week. Just family, I promise." "Sure," I said. I looked at Elena. She finally looked up, her eyes wet with tears of relief and guilt. She thought she had gotten away with it. She thought the old carpenter had accepted his place in the dirt. "Enjoy the party," I said, buttoning my tweed jacket against the chill of the air conditioning. "Enjoy every single minute of it. Make sure you get your money's worth." I turned to the hostess. "Thank you for clarifying the list." "Have a good evening, sir," she said. Already looking past me to the next arriving couple, I turned my back on the glass wall, on the fake mahogany doors, on the daughter who had erased me, and the son-in-law who thought he could build a skyscraper on a swamp. I walked toward the exit. "Happy birthday, Leo," I whispered to the empty air. I pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped out into the Seattle night. The rain was falling harder now, cold and sharp. I did not run to my truck. I walked. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who knows exactly what he has to do next. "Enjoy the party with my money," I said aloud, the words mixing with the sound of traffic. They thought the check was a gift. They were wrong. The check was the contract, and they had just breached it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was an old model, screen cracked in the corner. But it worked. I had one call to make, just one. And then the walls of the Sapphire Lounge, metaphorically speaking, were going to come crashing down. The structure was flawed, the wood was rotten, and I, Robert Johnson, was about to bring the whole thing down. The walk to the parking lot felt like a march across a battlefield after the fighting had ceased, but before the smoke had cleared. The rain was coming down harder now, a relentless Seattle drizzle that soaked through the shoulders of my tweed jacket and chilled the skin beneath. I kept my head down, navigating the puddles that reflected the neon mockery of the Sapphire Lounge sign. My truck was parked in the far corner of the lot, away from the rows of pristine Teslas and leased Mercedes convertibles. It was a Ford F-150, model year 2005. The paint was a fading blue that I had waxed just last Sunday. But under the street lamps, it looked tired. It looked like a relic. It was a working vehicle, its bed scratched from lumber and tools, its suspension accustomed to the weight of solid oak and cast iron. It did not belong here, and tonight, neither did I. I unlocked the door with the physical key, the metal cold against my thumb. The heavy door groaned as I pulled it open, a sound of honest mechanical fatigue that was infinitely more comforting than the silent glide of the automatic doors I had just left. I climbed inside. The cab smelled of stale coffee, sawdust, and the faint, lingering scent of peppermint candies that I kept in the glove compartment for Leo. I slammed the door, shutting out the rain and the city. The silence inside the cab was sudden and absolute. That was when the dam broke. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, and I let out a sound that I did not recognize. It was not a sob. It was a guttural, jagged noise, the sound of a timber snapping under a load it was never designed to bear. I leaned my forehead against the cold vinyl of the steering wheel and wept. I did not weep for the money. $15,000 was a lot, but money is just sap. It flows and it dries up. I wept for the promise I had broken. Martha. Her name echoed in the small cabin. My wife, my moral compass, before she passed, when the cancer had reduced her voice to a whisper. She had made me swear. Take care of them, Bob. Elena is soft. She needs bracing. Promise me you will keep the family standing. I had promised. I had sworn it in the Bible and in my own life. And sitting there in the dark, I realized I had failed her. I had confused supporting with enabling. In carpentry, if you use a soft wood like pine for a load-bearing beam just because it is easier to cut, the house will eventually collapse. I had treated Elena like she was precious mahogany that needed to be shielded from every scratch, polished and protected. But I should have treated her like oak. I should have let her weather the storm so she could grow strong. Instead, I had shielded her so completely that she had rotted from the inside, her core consumed by entitlement and the desperate need for validation from a man like Marcus. I had built a house on sand, and I was crying because the tide had finally come in. My phone buzzed against my thigh. It was a sharp, aggressive vibration that cut through the fog of my grief. I pulled it out, wiping my eyes with the back of my rough hand. It was a notification from my bank. Alert account ending in 442. Balance below minimum threshold. Current balance, $0.00. I stared at the screen. The blue light illuminated the tears on my cheeks. That was the rest of the transfer clearing. The deposit for the catering, the balloons, the cake Leo was eating right now. Something shifted in my chest. The grief did not vanish, but it hardened. It crystallized. In my line of work, when you find dry rot in a structural column, you do not cry over it. You do not paint over it. You do not wish it away. You take a chisel and a saw, and you cut it out. You remove every inch of the infection until you hit clean, solid wood. If you leave even a speck of the rot, it spreads. I sat up straight. I wiped my face with my sleeve. The tears were done. It was time for demolition. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 7:45 in the evening. Safety protocols engaged, I whispered to the empty truck. Clearing the site. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Samuel Weiss, attorney. Samuel was not just my lawyer. He was a man who understood the value of a handshake. I had built the floor-to-ceiling cherry wood bookshelves in his downtown office 20 years ago. He knew I measured 3 times, not twice. I pressed the call. It rang once, twice. Robert, Samuel's voice was warm but surprised. It is late. Is everything all right? No, Sam, I said. My voice was steady now, devoid of the tremble that had been there minutes ago. I need to execute a protocol. Do you have the file for the Johnson Family Trust handy? I am at home, Robert, but I can access the cloud server. What is happening? I need you to activate the force majeure clause we wrote into the land use agreement for the Laurelhurst property. There was silence on the other end, a long, heavy silence. Samuel knew exactly what that meant. The Laurelhurst property was the prime 2-acre lot where Marcus was currently building his flagship development. The apex, Marcus, told everyone he owned the land. He did not. I did. I had placed it in the trust 5 years ago when I sold the big workshop, allowing him to build on it as a beneficiary, provided he maintained certain ethical standards and financial solvency. Robert, Samuel said, his tone shifting to professional concern. If I trigger that clause, it freezes the title. It revokes the construction permit immediately. The bank will pull his construction loan by tomorrow morning. It effectively shuts down the entire project. I know the specs, Sam, I said. He is in breach. He is insolvent. And he is leveraging the trust's assets for high-risk speculation without my consent. I want the land locked down. I want to cease and desist on the construction site by 0800 hours tomorrow. You are sure? He erased me from my grandson's life tonight. Sam, he thinks I am just the scaffolding. He is about to find out I am the ground he is standing on. Do it. Consider it done, Samuel said softly. I will file the emergency motion electronically tonight. It will hit the county clerk's system at 8 in the morning. Thank you, Sam. Robert. Yes. Measure twice. I have measured, Sam. I have measured for 10 years. I hung up. Step 1 complete. The foundation was cracked. Now for the utilities. I dialed the bank's automated fraud line. I did not wait for a human. I navigated the menu with the precision of a pianist. Report a problem with a check. Please enter the check number, the robotic voice requested. I entered the number from memory. It was a check for $15,000. Stop payment, I commanded the voice recognition. Reason for stopping payment. Goods and services not received, I said clearly. Fraudulent representation. Stop payment confirmed. A fee of $35 will be applied. Worth every penny, I muttered. That check was the final payment for the venue and the catering. Without it. The deposit I had paid 2 weeks ago covered only the appetizers and the room rental, the dinner, the drinks, the 5-tier cake that was all unpaid balance. I was not done. I had one more call, the most immediate one, the demolition charge that would blow the windows out. I called the Sapphire Lounge directly. Sapphire Lounge, this is Brenda. How may I assist you? Brenda, let me speak to David, the owner. I am sorry. David is in the middle of a... Tell him it is Robert Johnson. Tell him the mahogany bar top in the VIP room has a stress fracture. It was a code we had joked about years ago when I restored his antique bar. It meant urgent. Pick up, 30 seconds later. David's voice came on the line. He sounded breathless. Robert, what is wrong? I saw you leave earlier. I thought you were just stepping out for a smoke. Why aren't you inside? David, listen to me carefully. I need you to cancel the authorization on the credit card I gave you for the deposit supplement, the Visa ending in 442. What, Robert? The party is in full swing. The main course is coming out in 10 minutes. If I kill the card authorization, the card is compromised. David, I lied. Though, in a way, it was the truth. It had been compromised by my own stupidity in giving it to people who despised me. I am reporting it lost right now. If you run any further charges on it, the bank will flag it as fraud and they will claw back the funds. You will be out $20,000, David gasped. Robert, I have 80 people eating filet mignon. If the card is dead. Who pays? Marcus Sterling, I said. The man in the Italian suit at the head table. The one drinking the 30-year-old scotch. You go to him, David. You go to him right now, before the dessert comes out. You tell him the payment method on file has been declined by the issuer. You tell him you need a direct, immediate form of payment for the full balance of the evening, $20,000. Wasn't it with the alcohol? He is not going to like that. It is embarrassing. David, I said, leaning back against the headrest, closing my eyes. He is a businessman. He understands liquidity. Make sure he pays. Do not let him leave the building until the transaction clears. Do you understand? Do not take a check. Card or wire, transfer only. Okay, David sounded panicked. Okay, Robert, I am going to the floor now. Good luck, David. I ended the call. I sat there for a moment in the silence of the truck. The rain drummed a steady rhythm on the roof. It sounded like applause. I put the key in the ignition and turned it. The Ford's engine roared to life, a deep, throaty rumble that shook the frame. It was a good sound, a real sound. I put the truck in reverse and backed out of the parking space. As I shifted into drive, I looked at the glowing entrance of the Sapphire Lounge one last time, inside. The waiters were likely approaching the head table right now. The smile was about to slide off Marcus's face. The panic was about to set in. The facade was about to peel away, revealing the rot underneath. I had planted the explosives. The timer was ticking down. I pressed the accelerator and drove out into the wet Seattle night, leaving the blast zone behind me. I was going home to my workshop. I had tools to sharpen. I had a life to rebuild. And for the first time in years, I felt like the man in charge of the job site. The drive home took 40 minutes. By the time I turned onto the gravel driveway of my property, the rain had settled into a steady, rhythmic drumming against the metal roof of my truck. My house was not a mansion. It was a single-story craftsman bungalow I had built with my own hands 30 years ago. It sat on 2 acres of land, dwarfed by the massive barn behind it that served as my workshop. When I stepped out of the truck, the air was different. It did not smell of exhaust and expensive perfume. It smelled of wet cedar, damp earth, and the faint, sweet scent of the honeysuckle that climbed the trellis by the front door. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence of the house wrapped around me like a heavy quilt. I took a deep breath. The interior smelled of lemon oil, old books, and the beeswax polish I made myself. This was my sanctuary. This was a place where things made sense, where joints were tight and surfaces were true. I took off my wet tweed jacket and hung it on the hook by the door. It felt heavy, like I was shedding a costume I had been forced to wear. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. I leaned against the Butcher Block Island hard maple. End grain construction, indestructible, and I let my mind drift back to the city. I was not there, but I did not need to be. I knew the mechanics of a collapse. I knew exactly what was happening at the Sapphire Lounge. At that very moment, David, the owner, would be approaching the head table. He was a man who hated confrontation, but he hated losing $20,000 even more. I could picture him signaling to the servers to pause the champagne service. The room would still be buzzing with conversation, the clinking of silverware, the polite laughter of people who were more interested in being seen than being present. Marcus would be holding court. He would have a glass of scotch in one hand, gesturing broadly, telling some inflated story about a zoning victory that never happened. Elena would be next to him, smiling that tight, anxious smile, her eyes darting around the room to ensure everyone was admiring them. Then David would lean in. He would not shout, he would whisper. He would place a hand on the back of Marcus's chair, a gesture that looked friendly from a distance, but was actually a restraint. "Mr. Sterling," he would say, "we have a problem with the payment method on file." Marcus would frown, annoyed at the interruption. "Not now. David, put it on the tab. I will sort it out on Monday." "I am afraid I cannot do that, sir," David would reply, his voice hardening. "The card on file has been reported lost and the bank has revoked the authorization. The $15,000 balance is outstanding, plus the bar tab." I took a sip of water, the cool liquid soothing my throat. I could feel the tension radiating from that imaginary table. Marcus would laugh, a nervous, barking sound. "Do not be ridiculous," Marcus would say, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "It is my father-in-law's card. He probably just hit a daily limit. Just run it again." "We did, sir. It is a hard decline. Code 41. Lost or stolen. We need an alternative form of payment immediately, or we will have to suspend service." This was the stress point. This was where the load exceeded the capacity of the beam. Marcus did not have $20,000. I knew his finances better than he knew them himself. He had leveraged everything into Skyline Dreams, a cryptocurrency-backed real estate venture that was nothing more than vapor. His liquid cash was non-existent. He lived on credit, shuffling debt from one card to another like a magician doing a card trick. But tonight, the deck was missing. He would reach for his wallet with feigned nonchalance. He would pull out the black titanium card from Apex Horizons. It looked impressive. It looked heavy, but it was hollow. "Fine," he would snap. "Use the corporate card, and bring us another bottle of Dom while you are at it." David would take the card. He would walk to the terminal at the server station, just 10 feet away. The guests at the nearby tables, the investors. The zoning board members would be watching now. They would sense the shift in atmospheric pressure. I walked out the back door of my house and crossed the wet grass to the workshop. I did not turn on the main overhead lights. I flipped the switch for the workbench lamp, casting a warm, yellow pool of light onto the scarred oak surface. My phone, sitting in the pocket of my flannel shirt, began to vibrate. I pulled it out. The screen lit up the dim room. Elena. I placed the phone face up on the workbench. It buzzed and danced across the wood, vibrating against a set of chisels. I did not touch it. I watched the name flash. I counted. 1, 2, 3. In the restaurant. The machine would have beeped. A long, flat tone, declined. David would have returned to the table, no longer whispering. "This card is also declined. Mr. Sterling, insufficient funds." The silence in the room would be absolute now. 80 people. 80 strangers witnessed the structural failure of the Sterling family facade. The phone stopped buzzing. Then it started again immediately. Elena. I picked up a bevel-edged chisel. It was a Lie Nielsen, made of a 2-tool steel. It was a good tool, but the edge had dulled slightly from the last project. It needed attention. I walked over to the sharpening station. I wet the Japanese water stones 1,000 grit, 4,000 grit, 8,000 grit. I poured a little water on the first stone. I ignored the phone. I placed the back of the chisel on the stone, finding the perfect angle. I began to move it back and forth. Shh, 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 shh. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. It was the sound of metal being refined, of weakness being ground away to reveal the sharp truth underneath. At the party, the whispering would have started. The vice president of zoning would be checking his watch, suddenly remembering an early morning appointment. The investors would be exchanging glances, raising their eyebrows. The illusion of unlimited wealth, of the successful developer, was shattering. "There must be a mistake," Marcus would be shouting now. His face would be red, sweat beading on his forehead. "Your machine is broken. Do you know who I am?" "I know you have a $20,000 bill and no way to pay it," David would answer. He was a polite man, but he had a business to run. "Sir, I am going to have to ask you to settle this now, or I will have to call the police for theft of services." The police. The ultimate humiliation. My phone stopped buzzing. A moment later, a notification popped up. A voicemail. I kept sharpening. Shh, shh. I moved to the 4,000 grit stone. The slurry turned gray with steel particles. I thought about Leo, while his father was screaming and his mother was panicking. What was Leo doing? I closed my eyes, and I could see him. He would be sitting at that big round table, surrounded by half-eaten appetizers. He would be small. He would be shrinking into himself, trying to disappear. He hated loud noises. He hated conflict. I remembered a rainy Tuesday 3 months ago. Leo had skipped soccer practice. He hated soccer and walked 2 miles to my house. I found him in the workshop, shivering. We didn't talk about why he ran away. We just worked. We built a Pine Derby car. I showed him how to use the coping saw to cut the curve of the fender. He had natural hands. Most kids force the saw. They try to push it through the wood. Leo let the blade do the work. He understood the material. He traced the grain with his small fingers and said, "Grandpa, the wood wants to go this way, right?" "That is right, Leo," I had said, feeling a lump in my throat. Always listen to the wood. It will tell you where it is strong and where it is weak. He had spatial intelligence. He could see things in 3 dimensions before they were built. He was a builder, like me. But Marcus wanted a tennis star. Elena wanted a pianist. They were trying to force a square peg into a round hole, shaving away pieces of his soul until he fit their mold. Tonight, amidst the shouting and the declined credit cards, Leo was seeing the cracks in the ceiling. He was realizing that the adults who controlled his world were not sturdy. They were hollow. I wiped the blade of the chisel. It was mirror bright. I tested it on the hair of my forearm. It shaved the hair clean without even touching the skin. Sharp. I finally picked up the phone. I tapped the voicemail icon. Elena's voice filled the quiet workshop. It was high-pitched, hysterical, distorted by the background noise of a room in chaos. "Dad, what the hell are you doing? David just told us you reported the card lost. Are you insane?" Marcus is screaming at the manager. "Everyone is staring at us. The investors are leaving. You have to call the bank right now and fix this. You are humiliating us. You are ruining Leo's birthday. How could you be so selfish?" The message ended. I listened to the silence that followed. She did not ask why I left. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not apologize for the way I was treated at the door. She only cared about the performance. She blamed me for the curtain falling down on her play. "Selfish," I whispered to the chisel. I opened the text message app. I typed slowly, my thick fingers tapping the glass with deliberation. I did not want to write a paragraph. I did not want to argue. In structural engineering, the strongest shapes are simple: triangles, arches. I wrote, "I am not on the guest list. Why should I be on the payment list?" I hit send. Then, I powered the phone off completely. I held the power button down until the screen went black. I placed the phone in a drawer under the workbench and locked it. I went back to the house. I took a shower, scrubbing the smell of the city off my skin with a bar of harsh, unscented soap. I put on clean pajamas. I went into the kitchen and made myself a cup of chamomile tea. I stood by the window, looking out at the dark shape of the barn against the night sky. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy mist. I knew that miles away. The party was over. The guests were gone. Marcus and Elena were likely sitting in the back office of the restaurant, frantically calling friends, trying to borrow money to pay the ransom to leave the building. They were experiencing the consequences of their architecture. But my heart ached. It ached for the little boy in the tuxedo who had watched his hero, his grandfather, walk away. He didn't know I was walking away to find a sledgehammer. He just saw me leave. "Hold on, Leo," I whispered against the cold glass of the window. "Grandpa is just clearing the site. We are going to build something better, something real." I went to bed at 10 o'clock, for the first time in 6 months, since the day I realized Elena was drifting away from me. I did not stare at the ceiling. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. It was the sleep of a man who has done an honest day's work. I had removed the rot. Now, the real work could begin. Sunday mornings were usually reserved for pancakes. For the last 4 years, I would drive over to Elena's house at 8 o'clock sharp, bringing a bag of fresh blueberries and a jug of real maple syrup, the grade A amber kind. Not the corn syrup sludge Marcus bought. I would stand at their stainless steel range, flipping cakes while Leo sat on the counter, telling me about his week. It was the only time the house felt like a home. Before Marcus woke up and turned on the news, before the stress of their lifestyle crept in like a draft under a poorly hung door. This Sunday, I stayed home. I sat at my kitchen table, a mug of black coffee steaming next to a stack of documents. The silence in the house was not peaceful. It was expectant. It was the silence of a job site, right before the demolition charges went off. I was not making pancakes. I was conducting a structural audit of my son-in-law's life. My phone rang at 9:30. It was Samuel. He was working on a Sunday, which meant the news was significant. "The freeze is in place," Samuel said without preamble. "The county clerk accepted the emergency motion at 8:01 this morning. The title for the Laurelhurst property is locked. No permits can be issued. No loans can be drawn against it. Construction at the site has effectively stopped." "Good," I said, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. "How did Marcus react?" "I have not heard from Marcus directly," Samuel said, his voice dropping an octave. "But Robert, when I filed the motion, I had to pull the full chain of title and the encumbrances on the trust. I found something you need to know. It is irregular." Define irregular. Sam, is it a termite problem or a dry rot problem? It is a foundation failure, Samuel replied. There is a secondary lien on the property. It was recorded 3 months ago. It is a mezzanine loan. High interest, short term. The collateral is not just the land's appreciation. The collateral includes the beneficiary's future interest. I set my coffee mug down. I did so very carefully, ensuring the ceramic made no sound against the wood table. English, Sam. Marcus leveraged Leo's portion of the trust, Samuel said. He found a loophole in the guardian ad litem clause. He signed on Leo's behalf, claiming the funds were for educational investment. He borrowed $200,000 against your grandson's inheritance. The air in my kitchen seemed to vanish. I felt a pressure in my chest, a physical weight. Where did the money go? It went straight into a shell company called Apex Digital, Samuel said. I traced it. It is the parent entity for that Skyline Dreams project he has been pitching. Send me the prospectus, I said. My voice was so cold I barely recognized it. I already emailed it to you. Robert, be careful. I hung up and opened my laptop. The Skyline Dreams prospectus was a glossily produced PDF file. It was full of buzzword synergy, vertical integration, sustainable luxury living. It promised a 40-story mixed-use tower in a zone that I knew for a fact was height-restricted to 6 stories. I put on my reading glasses and stopped looking at the pictures. I looked at the specs. I looked at the engineering claims. I have spent 40 years reading blueprints. I know how a building stands up. I know the relationship between load and resistance. As I scrolled through Marcus's vision, I felt sick. The proposed site was on the edge of the wetlands near the Sound. The soil composition there is glacial till and liquefiable silt. To build a 40-story tower there, you would need to drive piles down at least 150 feet to hit bedrock. The budget in the prospectus allocated funds for a standard slab-on-grade foundation. If they built this, it would sink. Then I looked at the floor-to-area ratio. They were selling units that did not exist. The square footage claimed in the sales brochures exceeded the physical footprint of the building by 30%. It was not a building. It was a mathematical impossibility. It was a Ponzi scheme, dressed up in architectural rendering software. He was taking deposits for condos that could never legally or physically be built, using money stolen from his son's future to pay the interest on the loans he took to throw parties at the Sapphire Lounge. Marcus was not just a bad builder. He was an arsonist. And he had trapped my grandson inside the burning house. I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. I did not need to look out the window to know it was a Mercedes. The engine had a specific, high-pitched idle that grated on my nerves. I closed the laptop. I did not stand up. I waited. The front door flew open. Elena did not knock. She stormed into the kitchen, bringing the damp chill of the morning with her. She looked terrible. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed from crying. Her expensive blowout hair was pulled back in a messy knot. She was wearing sweatpants and an oversized coat, stripping away the glamour she had worn like armor the night before. "You blocked the construction site," she said. It was not a question. It was an accusation hurled like a stone. "Good morning, Elena," I said calmly. "There is coffee if you want some." "Stop it!" she screamed, slamming her hand on the table. The coffee in my mug rippled. "Stop acting like this is normal. Marcus got a call from the foreman this morning. The gates are padlocked. The bank called 10 minutes later to freeze the line of credit because the collateral was disputed. Do you have any idea what you have done? You have destroyed us." "I stopped a crime," I said. "There is a difference. A crime he is trying to build a future for us for Leo." "Sit down," I said. "I will not sit down." My voice cracked like a whip. It was the voice of the master carpenter. Elena froze. Slowly. She pulled out a chair and sat. She was trembling. I turned the laptop around and pushed it toward her. Look at this. I do not want to see your boring documents, she spat. This is the prospectus for Skyline Dreams, I said. Look at page 14, foundation specs. She looked away, crossing her arms. I do not understand construction. Dad, Marcus handles the business. That is the problem. Elena, neither does he. Or maybe he does. And he just does not care. I tapped the screen. He is proposing a floating slab on silt for a 40-story load. That building would collapse before the glass was even installed. And look here. Zoning code 34-B. Maximum height limit is 65 feet. He is selling floors 10 through 40. He is selling air. Elena. He is selling nothing. He has a variance, she argued, parroting words she clearly did not understand. He knows people in the city. There is no variance for gravity, I said, and there is no variance for math. But that is not the worst part. I pulled the printout of the line Samuel had found. I slid it across the wood. He borrowed $200,000 against Leo's trust fund. He forged the guardian's consent. Elena stared at the paper. Her eyes scanned the lines. I saw the moment the realization hit her. Her breath hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth. He said that was for Leo's private school tuition prepay, she whispered. Her voice was shaking. He said it was a portfolio reallocation. It is gone. Elena, it is in Apex Digital, and Apex Digital is burning cash to pay for champagne and leased Mercedes-Benzes. I leaned forward. He stole from your son. He stole from my grandson. She closed her eyes. Tears leaked out, tracking through the remnants of yesterday's makeup. For a second, I thought I had reached her. I thought the daughter I raised, the girl who used to cry when she saw a bird with a broken wing, was coming back. But then she opened her eyes, and the fear was gone, replaced by a desperate, delusional defensive wall. You just hate him, she said. Her voice was rising again, frantic. You have always hated him because he dreams big, because he does not want to work with his hands and smell like sawdust like you. He is going to fix it. He told me this morning. It is just a liquidity crunch. Once the pre-sales clear next week, he will pay the trust back with interest. There are no pre-sales. Elena. I slammed my hand on the table. It is a scam. There is no building. You are lying, she stood up, knocking the chair over. You are just jealous. You are old and you are bitter, and you cannot stand that we are successful. I looked at her. I looked at the woman standing in my kitchen, defending the man who had looted her child's future. It was like looking at a piece of wood so riddled with rot that it crumbled under the slightest pressure. Success, I asked quietly. Success is being kicked out of a restaurant because your credit cards are declined. Success is stealing from a 9-year-old. Is that success? We are just going through a rough patch. No, I said. You are going through a collapse, and I am not going to let you pull me down with you. And I am certainly not going to let you pull Leo down. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the gray sky. The land is frozen, I said, my back to her. I am instructing Samuel to petition for a forensic audit of the trust. If Marcus does not return that $200,000 within 48 hours, I am going to the district attorney. You would send him to jail, she gasped. He is your family. He is a thief, and effective immediately. I am cutting you off. No more checks. No more covering the mortgage when Marcus has a bad month. No more paying for parties I am not invited to. Dad, please, she begged, her tone shifting instantly from anger to manipulation. We cannot make the mortgage this month without your help. We will lose the house. Then lose it, I said, turning to face her. Live within your means. Get a job. Marcus can get a job. I hear the lumber yard is hiring laborers. Elena stared at me with pure hatred. Her face twisted into something ugly, something I had never seen before. It was the face of an addict being denied their fix. "Fine," she hissed. "You want to play hardball. You want to talk about assets." She took a step back toward the door. "If you do not unlock that land, and if you do not give us the bridge loan we need, you will never see Leo again." The room went dead silent. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick, tock. "What did you say?" I asked. My voice was a whisper. "You heard me," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I am his mother. I decide who he sees. If you are not supporting this family, you are not part of this family. No more Thursday visits. No more Sunday pancakes. You are done. You are erased." I felt a pain in my chest that was sharper than any saw blade. It was a physical blow. She knew exactly where to strike. She knew Leo was the only thing in this world that kept me tethered to the ground. I looked at her. I looked for the little girl in the pigtails. She was gone. "Elena," I said. I did not shout. I did not cry. I spoke with the absolute finality of a judge passing a sentence. "Do not use that boy as a hostage." "Fix this, Dad," she said, hand on the doorknob. "Or say goodbye to your grandson." "If the structure is weak," I said, "the house will fall. Do not blame the master builder when the roof caves in on your head. And when it does, Elena and it will do not come running to me expecting me to catch you. I will be here to catch Leo, but you are on your own." "Go to hell," she said. She slammed the door. The glass panes rattled in their frames. I stood in the silence of my kitchen. I heard the Mercedes engine roar to life and tires spin on the gravel as she peeled out of the driveway. I sat back down at the table. My coffee was cold. I picked up the prospectus for Skyline Dreams. I picked up a red pen. I turned to page 1. "All right, Marcus," I said to the empty room. "You want to play games with my grandson's life. Let us see how your paperwork holds up against 100 years of experience." I began to annotate the document. Every lie, every inconsistency, every violation. I was going to dismantle him piece by piece. She thought she had played a trump card. She did not realize that by threatening to take Leo away, she had removed the last reason I had to show mercy. I was not just a grandfather anymore. I was the demolition crew, and I was going to bring it all down. 30 days is a long time in the life of a piece of wood, if left out in the rain, unfinished. 30 days is enough for the grain to rise, for the fibers to swell, and for the gray pallor of decay to set in. 30 days is also a long time for a grandfather. It had been 4 weeks since Elena slammed my kitchen door. 4 weeks since she turned my grandson into a bargaining chip. In that time, the silence in my house had transformed from a peaceful quiet into a heavy, suffocating blanket. I woke up every morning at 5 o'clock, made my coffee, and looked at the empty spot on the refrigerator where Leo's drawings used to hang. I had taken them down, not out of anger, but because looking at them felt like pressing a thumb into a bruise. I placed them in a flat file drawer in the workshop, preserved between sheets of acid-free paper, waiting for the day he could come back to claim them. I was banned from the house. I was banned from the school pickup line. But Seattle is a city of hills and sightlines, and a grandfather who knows the terrain finds a way. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, I drove my Ford truck to a spot on 23rd Avenue, 2 blocks up the hill from Leo's private school. There was a gap in the rhododendron bushes that offered a clear view of the student pickup zone. I would sit there with a pair of binoculars, Leica, German optics, sharp as a tack, and I would wait. I watched Leo come out of the double doors. He walked differently now. His shoulders were hunched, his backpack looking like it was filled with lead rather than textbooks. He did not run to the waiting cars like the other children. He dragged his feet. I saw him get into Elena's Mercedes. I saw the way she did not turn around to talk to him. I saw the back of her head, rigid and tense. I saw my grandson press his forehead against the cold glass of the passenger window, looking out at a world that no longer made sense to him. I wanted to honk. I wanted to drive down there and tear the door off that car, but I stayed still. I was practicing the hardest discipline of my trade patience. When the glue is drying, you do not touch the clamp. If you release the pressure too soon, the joint fails. While I waited, the world outside my window turned ugly. Marcus and Elena had launched a campaign. It was not a physical assault. It was chemical warfare. They were poisoning the groundwater of my reputation. It started with subtle comments at the country club, whispers that filtered back to me through the grapevine. Robert is slipping. He is getting confused. We had to take over his finances for his own good. Then it moved to the internet. I am not a man of social media. But my friend Frank is. Frank is a retired plumber with 2 artificial hips and too much time on his hands. He came over one rainy afternoon, limping into my workshop with a tablet in his hand. "You need to see this, Bob," Frank said, his face grim. He showed me a post on the neighborhood community page. It was written by Elena. It was a long, rambling narrative about the challenges of caring for aging parents with cognitive decline and the heartbreak of irrational outbursts. She did not name me, but she did not have to. Everyone knew. She painted a picture of a senile, vindictive old man who had ruined a child's birthday party out of confusion and spite. "She is saying you have dementia," Frank spat, tapping the screen with a grease-stained finger. "She is setting the stage. Bob, she is trying to discredit you so when the lawsuits hit. No one believes the crazy old carpenter." I looked at the screen. I read the comments from strangers offering their sympathy to her, calling her a saint for dealing with such a toxic burden. "Let them talk," I said, turning back to my workbench. "Wood does not care what you call it. It only cares if you cut it true." "It is not just talk," Frank warned. "It is a strategy." He was right. 2 days later, a courier arrived with a heavy envelope. It was from a law firm I did not recognize, sharks hired by Marcus. Paid for with credit he probably did not have. It was a formal demand for me to relinquish my position as the trustee of the Johnson Family Trust. It cited breach of fiduciary duty and mental incapacity. They threatened a competency hearing. I threw the letter into the wood stove that heated my shop. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the expensive letterhead turning to ash. They were trying to declare me incompetent so they could get their hands on the land. It was a desperate move, the flailing of a drowning man trying to climb onto the person who was swimming to save him. I channeled my anger into the only thing that helped the work. I have taken on a new project. It was a grandfather clock from the 1880s, a massive thing made of black walnut. It had been sitting in a damp basement for 50 years before a client brought it to me. The movement was seized, the wood was covered in mold, and the pendulum was bent. It was the perfect metaphor for my life. I spent my nights in the workshop, the rain hammering against the metal roof, dissecting the clock. I removed the hood and the waste door. I stripped the movement down to its individual components. Hundreds of brass gears, pinions, and levers laid out on a white cloth. I picked up the anchor escapement. This is the heart of the clock. It is the piece that regulates the release of energy, the piece that turns the raw power of the weights into the measured ticking of time. The steel pallets on the anchor were worn down, grooved deep by a century of friction. Because of this wear, the clock could not keep time. It would run fast, then slow, then stop altogether. "Abrasion," I whispered to the empty room. "Constant, low-level friction. It ruins everything eventually." I set to work polishing the pallets. I used a diamond paste and a hardwood lap. It was slow work, back and forth, removing the damage, microscopic layer by microscopic layer. If I rushed, I would change the geometry of the escapement, and the clock would never run again. I had to be perfect. While I polished, my network of spies reported in. They were guys like Frank, retired tradesmen, Vietnam vets, guys who had spent their lives working with their hands. We had an unspoken code. You do not mess with a man's family, and you do not mess with a man's tools. Marcus is selling the furniture, Frank told me one evening, setting a six-pack of beer on my bench. I stopped polishing. Which pieces? The dining set, Frank said. The one with the claw feet, and the armor. He listed them on an online auction site under a fake name. Luxury estate sale. I felt a cold spike in my chest. That armor. I had built it for Elena when she turned 16. It was a solid cherry, harvested from a tree that had fallen on my father's land. I had hand-cut the dovetails. I had spent 40 hours French polishing the finish until it glowed like an ember. I had hidden a small compartment in the base where she could keep her diary. It was not just furniture. It was a love letter in wood, and Marcus was selling it for cash to pay the interest on his loans. Get it back, I said. I am on it, Frank nodded. I have got my nephew bidding. He is using a dummy account. Marcus will never know it is coming back to you. Do not let him know, I said, my voice hard. Pay whatever it takes. I will reimburse you in cash. 3 days later, a white van pulled up to my barn in the middle of the night. Frank and his nephew unloaded the armoire. It was wrapped in moving blankets. When we unwrapped it, I ran my hand over the door. There was a scratch on the side, a deep gouge where someone had carelessly banged it against a doorframe. I traced the scratch with my thumb. It felt like a wound on my own skin. They were stripping the assets, selling off the history of the family to keep their facade of wealth alive for another week. I moved the armor into the corner of the shop, covering it gently with a dust sheet. You are safe now, I whispered, but Leo was not safe. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. It was late, past 11. I was applying the final coat of oil to the clock case, the smell of linseed filling the air. My phone buzzed. It was not a number I recognized. It was a restricted ID. I wiped my oily hands on a rag and picked it up. Hello? Grandpa. The voice was a whisper, small and terrified. It was Leo. My heart hammered against my ribs. Leo, buddy, is that you? I am in the bathroom, he whispered. The sound was tinny. I am using Kevin's watch. He let me borrow it at school because I wanted to hear your voice. I gripped the phone so hard, I thought the plastic casing might crack. I am here, Leo. Grandpa is right here. Are you okay? I hate it here, he sobbed, a stifled sound like he was burying his face in a towel. Mom and Dad fight all the time. Dad yells about money. Mom cries. They sold the piano, Grandpa, and they sold the big table. I know, buddy, I know. Dad says you are bad, Leo said, his voice trembling. He says you are trying to hurt us, but I know you are not. I told him Grandpa fixes things. He does not break things. Tears pricked my eyes. That is right. Leo, I am trying to fix it. Listen to me. You have to be strong, like oak. Remember. I remember, he sniffled. Grandpa. Yes. I miss the smell of your shop. It smells like glue and dust here. Your house smells like wood. I want to come home. I am working on it. Leo, I promise you. I am working on it every single second. Dad is coming, Leo gasped. I have to go. The line went dead. I stood there in the silence of the workshop, holding the phone to my ear long after the connection had been cut. I could hear the phantom echo of his fear. I want to come home. I looked at the grandfather clock. I had finished polishing the escapement. I had cleaned the gears. I had oiled the pivots. The mechanism was ready. I walked over to the movement and mounted it back into the case. I hung the pendulum. It was a heavy brass disc, suspended on a long steel rod. I gave it a push. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The sound was strong, even, regular. The heartbeat of the machine had been restored. I looked at the scratch on the armor. I looked at the letter from the lawyers burning in the stove. I looked at the dark window where my grandson was sleeping in a house that was crumbling around him. For 30 days. I had been patient. I played defense. I had let them attack me, let them smear my name, let them sell my work, hoping they would hit rock bottom and come to their senses. But rust does not sleep, and rot does not stop on its own. I picked up the heavy brass winding key for the clock. I turned it, cranking the weights up, storing potential energy in the system. The cables grew tight. The tension built. "No more defense," I said. My voice was low, vibrating with the same tension as the clock cables. If Marcus wanted a war, he was going to get one. But he was fighting with lies and leverage. I was fighting with the truth and the absolute, unyielding laws of physics. I put the phone in my pocket. I walked over to the wall where I kept my demolition tools. I looked at the sledgehammer. I looked at the crowbar. I did not need those. Not yet. I went to my desk and pulled out the file on Apex Horizons. I pulled out the forensic audit Samuel had sent over an hour ago, the one I had been too busy polishing gears to read. I opened it. The numbers were there. The trail was clear. It was not just incompetence. It was a fraud. Federal wire fraud. I picked up my pen. "Okay, Marcus," I said. "You want to talk about competency? Let us see how competent you look in handcuffs." I was done being the abrasion, wearing them down slowly. It was time to be the saw. It was time to cut the rot out, once and for all. The structural failure of a building is rarely instantaneous. It begins with a groan. A rivet pops. A beam deflects. Dust falls from the ceiling. Then, gravity takes over. And the acceleration is terrifying. For Marcus and Elena. The groaning started on a Tuesday morning, 10 days after I had instructed Samuel to freeze the land assets. I was not there to see the construction site shut down. But I heard about it. In the trade. Bad news travels faster than a fire in a lumberyard. The foreman at the Apex site had arrived at 6 in the morning to find a red tag on the gate. Stop work order. Violation of title. By noon. The subcontractors, the electricians, the plumbers. The guys pouring concrete were packing up their tools. They knew the smell of a job gone sour. If the bank freezes the draw, the paychecks stop. And if the paychecks stop, the hammers stop swinging. But I was there to see the car go. I had driven past their house on my way to the hardware store. I told myself it was the most direct route. But in truth, I was patrolling the perimeter. I saw the tow truck backing into their driveway. It was not a flatbed for a breakdown. It was a repo truck with a hydraulic lift. The driver, a big man with a cigarette dangling from his lip, didn't even knock on the door. He checked the VIN number on the dashboard of the silver Mercedes, hooked the chains to the axle, and lifted the rear end into the air. I saw the front curtains of the house twitch. I saw Elena's face, pale and terrified, peering out. She did not come out to stop him. She couldn't. She knew that if she stepped onto the driveway, the neighbors would see her shame. So she hid behind the silk drapes and watched her status symbol being dragged away down the street. The alarm blaring a futile protest until it faded into the distance. The facade was stripped. Now, the weather was getting in. My phone rang at 11:30. I was in the hardware store, buying a box of 1-inch brass screws. I looked at the caller ID. It was not Elena. It was Crestwood Academy. My stomach dropped. I abandoned the screws on the counter and answered immediately. "Mr. Johnson." It was Mrs. Gable, the school principal. Her voice was tight. "We have had an incident involving Leo." "Is he hurt?" I asked, already moving toward the door. "He has a bloody nose and a bruised cheek," she said. "But he gave as good as he got." "Mr. Johnson, Leo got into a fistfight during recess. He struck another student." Leo. My gentle, quiet Leo who rescued spiders from the bathtub. "I tried calling his mother," Mrs. Gable continued, her voice lowering. "I have called Mrs. Sterling 6 times. It goes straight to voicemail. I called Mr. Sterling's office, and the line has been disconnected. You are the emergency contact." "I am on my way," I said. 10 minutes. I broke the speed limit getting there. When I walked into the administrative office, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Leo was sitting on a plastic chair in the corner, holding an ice pack to his face. His white uniform shirt was splattered with red drops. He looked tiny. He looked alone. When he saw me, his bottom lip trembled. But he did not cry. He set his jaw. It was the same stubborn look I saw in the mirror every morning. Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Gable stood up. We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence. Leo is suspended for 3 days. What happened? I asked, kneeling down in front of my grandson. I gently moved the ice pack. His cheek was swelling, turning a dark, angry purple. Leo, look at me. Why did you hit him? Leo looked at his shoes. He picked at a loose thread on his trousers. He said things, Leo whispered. What things? He said, Leo swallowed hard. He said the police are coming for my dad. He said my dad is a crook and we are poor now. He said we are going to live in a box. I closed my eyes for a second. Children are cruel, but they are also mirrors of their parents' dinner table conversations. The gossip about Marcus had filtered down to the playground. Okay, I said softly. I stood up and looked at the principal. I will take him. Do not expect his parents to call you back today. Is everything all right at home? Mr. Johnson, she asked, her eyes searching mine. We have noticed Leo changing. He is hungry in the mornings. His tuition payment is overdue. I am handling it, I said. He is with me now. I took Leo's hand. It was cold and clammy. We walked out to my truck. I did not lecture him. I did not ask about the suspension. I buckled him in and drove. We did not go to his house. We went to mine. For the first hour, we did not talk. I made him a grilled cheese sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup. He ate it like a starving animal, wiping the bowl clean with the crust of the bread. It broke my heart. When was the last time he had a hot meal after lunch? I took him to the workshop. Put this on, I said, handing him his small canvas apron. I went to the lumber rack and pulled down a piece of rough-sawn white oak. It was ugly. The surface was gray, covered in mill marks and dirt. It had a knot in the center that looked like a scar. What do you see? I asked him. A dirty board, Leo mumbled, touching his bruised cheek. I see a table leg, I said. But it is hiding. We have to find it. I handed him a sanding block with 80 grit paper. This is rough work, Leo. It takes muscle. You have to push through the ugly part to get to the good wood underneath. Rub it. With the grain. Never against it. For 2 hours. The only sound in the shop was the shh of sandpaper on wood. Leo worked out his anger on that board. He sanded until his forehead was sweating, until the sawdust coated his arms like gold dust. I watched his breathing slow down. I watched the tension leave his small shoulders. Look, Grandpa, he said quietly. He wiped the dust away. The gray surface was gone, underneath. The oak was a warm, honey color. The grain swirled around the knot, creating a pattern that looked like a flowing river. It is beautiful, he whispered. The beauty comes from the friction, Leo, I said, resting my hand on his shoulder. If you do not rub it, if you do not go through the rough grit, you never see the grain. Life is like that. Today was a rough grit day. It hurts, it scrapes you. But it is just revealing who you really are. And you are solid oak, kid. He hugged me then. He buried his face in my sawdust-covered apron and held on tight. That was when the police siren cut through the air. I stiffened. I looked out the workshop window. A police cruiser was tearing up my driveway, lights flashing blue and red against the gray afternoon. Behind it was a beat-up taxi. Elena jumped out of the taxi before it even stopped moving. She looked wild. Her hair was matted, her eyes frantic. "He is in there!" she screamed, pointing at my barn. "He stole him! Arrest him!" I stepped out of the workshop, placing myself between Leo and the door. "Stay inside, Leo," I commanded. Officer Jim Miller stepped out of the cruiser. I had known Jim for 20 years. I had built the crib for his firstborn daughter. He looked uncomfortable. He kept his hand near his belt, but not on his gun. "Robert," Jim said, nodding at me. "We have a problem." "What is the problem, Jim?" I asked, crossing my arms. Elena ran past him, getting in my face. She smelled of stale sweat and panic. "You kidnapped my son. The school said you took him. You have no right that is kidnapping." "I picked up my grandson because the school called me," I said, my voice calm and low. "They called me because you did not answer your phone. Elena, they called me because Leo got in a fight and was suspended, and his mother was nowhere to be found." "My phone battery died," she shrieked. It was a lie. I could see the lie in her eyes. She was dodging creditors. She was afraid to answer unknown numbers. "I want him arrested. Jim," Elena yelled at the officer. "He is holding my child without my consent. Put him in handcuffs." Jim looked at me, then at Elena. "Mrs. Sterling, kidnapping implies intent to conceal. Robert brought him to his home. He is the emergency contact on file. I checked with the school dispatch." "He is trying to turn Leo against me," she sobbed, her anger suddenly turning to hysteria. "He is stealing everything from us. He froze our bank accounts, he took our land, and now he wants my baby." The workshop door creaked open. Leo stepped out. He was still wearing his apron. He looked at his mother disheveled, screaming, terrified, and then he looked at me. "Leo!" Elena rushed forward. "Oh my God! Baby! Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Come here." She reached for him. Leo took a step back. He moved behind me. He gripped the back of my flannel shirt with both hands. The silence that followed was louder than the siren. Elena froze, her hands reaching out to empty air. Her son, her baby, was hiding from her. He was seeking protection from the bad man she had spent a month vilifying. "Leo," she whispered, "come to Mommy. We are going home." "I do not want to go home," Leo said. His voice was small but clear. "It is dark there." Jim stepped closer. He was a good cop. He heard the details. "What do you mean it is dark, son?" Jim asked gently. "There are no lights," Leo said, peering around my leg. "And the water does not work. We have to use bottles. And it is cold. Mom says we are camping. But it is not camping. It is just cold." I looked at Elena. Her face crumpled. The rage drained out of her, leaving behind only a hollow, pathetic exhaustion. "Elena," I said, "did they cut the utilities?" She looked down at the gravel. She nodded. "3 days ago," she whispered. "Marcus said it was a clerical error. He said he would fix it. And the water, yesterday. And the car, this morning." She covered her face with her hands and began to weep. It was a jagged, ugly sound. "We have nothing. Dad, we have absolutely nothing. The accounts are frozen. The credit cards are maxed. The pantry is empty. We are eating crackers for dinner." Jim sighed. He took his hand off his belt and rubbed the back of his neck. "Mrs. Sterling, I cannot let you take a minor child back to a residence with no heat or running water. That is a code violation. Child Protective Services would have to get involved." Elena looked up, terror in her eyes. "No, please do not take him to foster care." "He is not going to foster care," I said. I walked over to Elena. I did not hug her. I did not comfort her. I stood before her like a structural column, unmoved, unbending. "He stays here," I said. "I have heat. I have food. I have a bed. He stays with me until you get the power turned back on. That is not a request. Elena, that is the only way you avoid Jim here filing a report for child neglect." Elena looked at Jim. He nodded solemnly. "Robert is right. Ma'am, if you take him to that house tonight, I have to call it in. Let him stay here. She looked at Leo. He was still holding onto my shirt, his knuckles white. Okay, she whispered. Okay. You can stay in the guest room, I said. For one night. I will not turn my daughter out onto the street. But Marcus does not step foot on this property. If he shows up, I will call Jim back. And this time, someone will leave in handcuffs. Do you understand? He is at a motel, Elena said. He left this afternoon. He said he needed space to think. Of course he did. The coward. When the roof caves in, the rat is the first one out the window. Go inside, I told her. Take a shower. There is stew on the stove. She walked past me, head bowed, defeated. She looked like a ghost. Jim looked at me and shook his head. You are a hard man, Robert. Softwood rots, Jim, I said. I am just keeping the structure standing. I will file this as a domestic disturbance. Resolved on scene, Jim said, opening his car door. But Robert, watch your back. Desperate people do desperate things. And that son-in-law of yours, he sounds desperate. I am ready for him, I said. I watched the police car drive away. I turned to Leo. He was looking up at me, his eyes wide. Is Mom okay? He asked. She is broken, Leo, I said, brushing the sawdust off his shoulder. But we can fix broken things. It just takes time, and a lot of sanding. I took his hand. We walked back into the workshop to turn off the lights. The piece of oak he had sanded was sitting on the bench, glowing in the dusk. It was smooth. It was true. We had stripped away the varnish. We had sanded off the rough spots. Now, we were down to the raw wood, and for the first time in years, I felt like we could actually build something that would last. But I knew this wasn't over. Marcus was out there, cornered and vicious, and a cornered rat doesn't just run. Sometimes, it bites. I locked the heavy workshop door and slid the deadbolt home. Click. Tonight. My family was safe. Tomorrow. I would have to be ready for the counterattack. The storm broke at 2 a.m. It wasn't the rain this time. It was a man. I was awake, sitting in the armchair by the front window, keeping watch. The house was quiet. Leo was asleep in his old room, wrapped in a quilt my wife had sewn. Elena was in the guest room, probably staring at the ceiling, wondering how her life had disintegrated so completely in less than a month. I saw headlights sweep across the front lawn, cutting through the darkness like searchlights. A car skidded on the gravel, not the Mercedes, but a cheap rental sedan. The engine died, and a car door slammed with violent force. Then the pounding started. It was not a knock. It was an assault on the wood. Fists hammering against the solid oak door I had carved myself. Robert, open this door. I know she is in there, open it. It was Marcus. His voice was slurred, thick with whiskey and rage. I did not rush. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking in the silence. I walked to the hallway closet. I did not reach for a gun. I don't believe in them for home defense. A gun is a tool of destruction, and I am a builder. Instead, I reached for a gouge, a 2-inch heavy-duty timber framing chisel with a steel cap. It was heavy, balanced, and sharp enough to split a knotty pine log with a single strike. I walked to the door. I could hear Elena stirring in the back room, her footsteps light and fearful. Stay back, I said, my voice projecting clearly down the hallway. Do not come out until I say so. I unlocked the deadbolt and threw the door open. Marcus stumbled forward, his fist raised to strike again, hitting only empty air. He nearly fell into the foyer but caught himself on the doorframe. He looked like a ruin. His Italian suit was wrinkled and stained. His tie was loose. His eyes were bloodshot. Swimming with alcohol and desperation, he reeked of cheap bourbon and fear. When he saw me, he froze. He saw the chisel in my hand, the steel glinting in the porch light. He saw the way I stood feet, shoulder-width apart. grounded, immovable, the posture of a man who has weathered storms that would blow him away like chaff. "Where is she?" Marcus demanded, trying to muster his old arrogance but failing. "Where is my wife? You kidnapped my son." "Your wife is safe," I said. "Your son is sleeping. And you are trespassing." "This is my family," he shouted, stepping into the house. I did not move back. I stepped forward. I brought the chisel up just an inch, a subtle reminder of the physics of the situation. He stopped. "You have no family here, Marcus," I said. "You forfeited that right when you stole from a 9-year-old. He blinked, swaying slightly. The aggression began to crumble, replaced by a pathetic, whining desperation. He slumped against the wall. "Bob, please," he stammered. "You have to help me. They are going to kill me." "Who?" "The lenders, the private ones, not the bank." He wiped sweat from his forehead. "I borrowed $50,000 last week to cover the payroll. I thought the trust money would clear. I need you to sign, Bob. Just sign the release for the land. Just for 48 hours. I will pay it back double. Triple, I swear on my life." "You swore on your life when you married my daughter," I said coldly. "And look what that was worth." "I can fix it," he pleaded, reaching out to grab my arm. I shifted the chisel, and he pulled his hand back as if burned. "I have a deal in Dubai. Huge. But I need liquidity to get there. Just sign the guarantor form. Please. For Elena. For Leo. If I go down, they lose everything." "They have already lost everything," I said. "Because of you." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had called me a relic, a dinosaur, a dirt digger. Now he was begging the dirt to save him. "Come with me," I said. "Where?" "The workshop." "Why?" "Because the house is for family. The workshop is for fixing mistakes. And you, Marcus, are a mistake." I led him out into the night air. The cold seemed to sober him up slightly. We walked to the barn. I turned on the overhead lights. The harsh, fluorescent glare illuminated every corner of the shop, the sawdust, the tools, the unfinished projects, and the file on my workbench. I walked over to the scrap bin. I pulled out a piece of cedar decking. It looked solid on the outside, but I knew better. "Look at this," I said, holding it up. "It is wood," Marcus muttered, shivering. "So what?" "It is rotten," I said. I took the chisel and drove it into the center of the board. With a sickening crunch, the wood disintegrated. It was powder inside, hollow. Dry rot. It looks fine on the surface, but inside it is dead. It spreads. It eats everything it touches. You cannot patch it. You cannot paint it. You have to cut it out. I threw the splintered remains at his feet. "You are the rot, Marcus." "I am a businessman," he yelled, his ego flaring up one last time. "I tried to give them a better life, a life you could never provide with your sawdust and your pennies." "Is that so?" I asked. I picked up the file, the forensic audit Samuel had sent me, but it wasn't just numbers anymore. Samuel's investigator had been thorough. "Elena," I called out. The side door of the workshop opened. Elena was standing there, wrapped in a blanket, shivering not from cold but from shock. She had followed us. I knew she would. She needed to see this. "Elena, baby," Marcus started, putting on his charming face, though it slid off his sweaty skin. Tell him we just need a bridge loan. Tell him about the Dubai deal." I opened the file. I pulled out a stack of photos and bank transfer records. I threw them onto the workbench. They fanned out like a losing hand of poker. "There is no Dubai deal," I said. "But there is a Cayman Islands account. Opened 6 months ago. $300,000 deposited. Money siphoned from the construction loans. Money stolen from Leo's trust." Elena walked forward slowly. She looked at the papers. "And this," I said, pointing to a photo. This is not a business partner. It was a picture of Marcus on a boat, a yacht. He was not alone. A young woman, half his age, was sitting on his lap. They were toasting with champagne. The date stamp was 2 weeks ago, the same day he told Elena he was working late to save the company. "Who is she?" Elena whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "Her name is Chloe," I read from the report. "She is 22, and she is the co-signer on the Cayman account. He wasn't trying to save the business. Elena. He was packing his bags. He bought 2 one-way tickets to Georgetown for tomorrow morning." The silence in the workshop was deafening. It was the silence of a structure imploding. Marcus looked at the photos. He looked at Elena. He laughed a brittle, hysterical sound. "So what?" he sneered. "Yeah, I was leaving. Can you blame me? Look at you, Elena. You are a drag. You are needy. You spend money like water, but you never ask where it comes from. You wanted the fairy tale well. Fairy tales cost money, and when the money ran out, you became boring." Elena made a sound like a wounded animal. Then she moved. She didn't scream. She launched herself across the workshop. She hit him with a force I didn't know she possessed. Her nails raked across his face. She punched, scratched, kicked. It was primal. It was the rage of a mother who realizes she has been feeding her child to a wolf. "You stole from my son," she screamed. "You stole his future to run away with a whore." Marcus stumbled back, trying to push her off. He shoved her hard. She fell back against the table saw, hitting her hip. "Enough!" I roared. I stepped in. I grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his ruined suit. I am 68 years old, but I lift lumber every day. My grip is like a vice clamp. I slammed him against the workshop wall. Tools rattled on their hooks. The chisel was still in my right hand, pressed flat against his chest. "Do not touch her," I growled. "Do not ever touch her again." Marcus looked into my eyes and saw something that terrified him. He saw the end. "Get out," I said. "Bob, Get out." I shoved him toward the door. "You are not going to the Caymans. Samuel sent this file to the district attorney an hour ago. And the IRS. Your passport is flagged. Marcus, you are not going to a beach. You are going to federal prison." He turned pale. You can't." "I just did. Now get off my property before I decide to treat you like a termite." He looked at me, then at Elena, who was sobbing on the floor. He opened his mouth to speak, but saw the chisel twitch in my hand. He turned and ran. He stumbled out into the darkness, back to his rental car. I heard the engine start, gears grind, and tires spin on the gravel. Then, silence. He was gone. I did not chase him. The rot had been cut out. Now, I had to deal with what was left. I turned to Elena. She was curled up on the concrete floor, surrounded by sawdust and the scattered evidence of her husband's betrayal. She was weeping, her whole body shaking. "He never loved us," she choked out. It was all a lie. The house, the parties, the marriage, it was all a scam. I looked down at her. Part of me wanted to kneel down, to hold her, to say, "It's okay, Daddy's here," but I didn't. If I picked her up now, she would never learn to stand. She would just lean on me until I broke, too. She had to feel the hard, cold floor. She had to know what rock bottom felt like, so she would never, ever want to be there again. I walked over to the workbench and calmly gathered the papers. I put the chisel back in its rack. "It hurts, doesn't it?" I said softly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Good," I said. "Pain tells you are still alive. It tells you where the injury is." I pulled a shop stool over and sat down, watching her. "He is gone, Elena. The money is gone, the house is gone, the car is gone. All the varnish is stripped away." "I am sorry," she wailed. "Dad, I am so sorry. You were right. You were right about everything." "Sorry. Don't rebuild a house, I said. Work does. I pointed to the pile of sawdust she was lying in. You are sitting in the dust of my work. This is what pays for the food you ate tonight. This is what paid for your wedding. This is what you were ashamed of. I was stupid, she whispered. Yes, you were. I didn't sugarcoat it. But wood can be refinished, even if it is scarred, even if it is burned. You can sand it down. You can start over. I stood up and extended a hand, not to pull her up, but to offer a grip. She had to do the lifting. Get up, Elena. She looked at my hand, my rough, calloused hand with dirt under the fingernails. The hand she had refused to hold in public. She reached out. Her manicured fingers gripped my palm. She pulled. She struggled. Her legs were weak. But she stood. She stood there, shivering. Mascara running down her face, barefoot in a barn. She looked like a wreck. But for the first time in 10 years, I was looking at my daughter, not a doll. What do we do now? She asked, her voice trembling. Now, I picked up a broom and held it out to her. Now we clean up the mess. And then, we start building. Rebuilding a house is always harder than building one from scratch. When you build from scratch, the materials are straight, the site is clear, and the blueprints are fresh. When you rebuild, you have to deal with the warped wood, the rusted nails, and the ghosts of the mistakes that brought the structure down in the first place. Elena and Leo moved into my bungalow on a Wednesday. By Friday, the reality of their new life had set in, and the withdrawal symptoms from their old life were hitting hard. For Leo, the transition was relatively smooth. He was young, and children are like green wood, flexible, adaptable. He took over the small guest room that used to be his mother's when she was a girl. I watched him unpack his few remaining toys, placing them on the shelf with a solemnity that belonged to a much older man. He did not ask for his iPad. He did not ask for the television. He seemed to understand, on a cellular level, that those things belonged to the world that had collapsed. For Elena, it was a brutal detox. The first week was a war of attrition. She walked around the house like a displaced queen, touching surfaces with a grimace, sighing loudly when the floorboards creaked. She missed her housekeeper. She missed her barista. She missed the illusion that life was something that was served to her on a platter. On the third morning, I walked into the kitchen at 6 o'clock to find her staring at the coffee pot in despair. It is too bitter, she complained, pushing the mug away. And we are out of almond milk. Then drink it black, I said, putting on my work boots. Or drink water, but do not complain about the fuel that is free. I cannot live like this, Dad, she snapped, her voice cracking. I am 32 years old. I am sleeping in a twin bed. I am scrubbing my own toilet. You are living, I corrected her, which is more than you were doing in that mausoleum Marcus built. You were just existing there. I implemented what I called workshop discipline. In my trade, chaos is the enemy. If your tools are scattered, your work suffers. If your mind is scattered, you lose a finger. I applied the same rules to the household. I woke up at 6 in the morning. Beds were made immediately, sheets pulled tight enough to bounce a quarter. Breakfast was eaten together at the table. No phones allowed. And then, the work began. I did not let Elena wallow. Idleness is the rot that eats the soul. I assigned her chores not to punish her, but to ground her. She was responsible for the garden. She had to weed the vegetable patch, turning the soil with her own hands. My nails are ruined, she cried one afternoon, holding up hands that were stained with dark earth. Good, I said, sharpening a plane blade nearby. Manicured hands are for holding champagne glasses. Stained hands are for holding life together. You are growing your own food, Elena. There is dignity in that, to bridge the gap between us, and to teach them the physics of connection. I brought an old project out of storage. It was a dining table made of white oak, heavy and solid, but it had fallen apart years ago because the glue had crystallized. It was a pile of boards, Nothing more. We are going to fix this, I told them one Saturday morning. Together. Elena looked at the pile of wood skeptically. Why, we can buy a table at IKEA for $200. We do not buy disposable things anymore, I said sternly. And we do not use screws. We are going to use joinery. I cleared the main workbench. I laid out the boards. I handed Elena a mallet and a chisel. I handed Leo a marking gauge. Today, we learned about the dovetail, I announced. I drew a diagram on a piece of scrap paper. The dovetail is the strongest joint in carpentry. It is not held together by glue. Glue is just the backup. It is held together by geometry, by friction, by the shape of the wood itself. I picked up 2 boards. This side has the tails, shaped like a dove's tail feathers. This side has the pins. They are wedge-shaped. When you fit them together, they lock. You cannot pull them apart. The harder you pull, the tighter they grip. I looked at Elena. Your marriage to Marcus was held together by glue, money, status. When the money dried up, the glue failed, and the joint fell apart. We are going to build this family like a dovetail, interlocking, unbreakable. The work was slow. Teaching someone to cut a dovetail by hand is an exercise in frustration. You have to see at a precise angle. If you are off by a fraction of a degree, the joint will not close. Elena struggled. She lacked muscle memory. She grew frustrated, throwing the chisel down more than once. "It does not fit," she yelled, wiping sweat from her forehead. "It is too tight." "Paring," I said gently. "Do not force it. Use the chisel. Take off a shaving as thin as paper. Patience, Elena. You cannot rush the fit." For 3 days, we worked on that table. The air in the shop was filled with the smell of oak shavings and the sound of tapping mallets. Slowly, I saw a change in her. She stopped looking at the clock. She stopped worrying about her nails. She started focusing on the wood. When we finally assembled the first corner, I told her to pick up the mallet. "Drive it home," I said. She lined up the joint. She swung the mallet. Thwack. The wood groaned, then slid. Thwack. It moved deeper. Thwack. The joint closed perfectly. The pins sat flush with the tails. A seamless, interlocking zipper of wood. Elena dropped the mallet. She ran her fingers over the joint. It was smooth. It was solid. She looked up at me, and for the first time in years, her eyes were clear. "It holds," she whispered. "It really holds. It will hold for 100 years, I said, "because you took the time to make it fit." That table became the center of our new life. We sanded it down to 400 grit and finished it with tung oil. When we ate dinner on it, Elena ran her hand along the edge, a subtle smile playing on her lips. She had built something. She had added value to the world instead of just consuming it. The discipline extended to finances. I made it clear I was not a bank. I provided the roof. But she had to provide her share. She found a job. It was not glamorous. She was an administrative assistant at a logistics trucking company in South Seattle. It paid $22 an hour. She answered phones, filed manifests, and dealt with grumpy truck drivers. When she brought home her first paycheck, she put it on the kitchen table. It was for $800 and change. "It is so small," she said, staring at it. "I used to spend this on a pair of shoes." "It is not small," I said. "It is real. That is 40 hours of your life. Elena, that is honest trade. No one died for that money. No one was scammed for it. You earned it." She looked at the check again. She picked it up and folded it carefully. "I am going to pay the electric bill," she said, "and I am going to buy Leo new sneakers. He is falling apart." "Good," I said. Leo, meanwhile, was blossoming. Stripped of the pressure to be a prodigy pianist or a tennis star, he reverted to his natural state, a maker. He spent his afternoons in the shop with me. He stopped asking to play video games. Instead, He carried a sketchbook everywhere. He drew bridges. He drew tree houses. He drew complex systems of pulleys and levers. One evening, he showed me a drawing of a chair. "Grandpa," he said, pointing to the legs, "if I angle the back legs out by 5 degrees, it will be more stable." Right, because the center of gravity is lower. I looked at the drawing. The geometry was perfect. He was 9 years old, and he understood load paths better than the architects Marcus had hired. "That is exactly right, Leo," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "You have the eye. You see the structure," he beamed. "I want to build it. Can we build it?" "We measure twice," I reminded him. "And cut once," he shouted, grabbing his tape measure. But the outside world tried to intrude on our peace. Marcus was not done. 2 weeks into their stay, I received a letter. It was not from a lawyer this time, but from Marcus himself. It was desperate, rambling, and threatening. He claimed he was going to sue me for alienation of affection. He claimed he had investors who would crush me. He demanded to see Leo. I sat on the porch and read it. Then I called Samuel. "He is rattling the cage, Sam," I said. "I know," Samuel replied. "He called my office. He was shouting." "Is the file ready?" "The file is with the district attorney," Samuel said, "but I kept a copy. I sent a certified letter to Marcus's motel this morning. It basically says that if he comes within 500 feet of your property, or files a single motion in court, we release the full unredacted evidence of the wire fraud and the tax evasion to the press. Will it hold him? He is a coward, Robert. Cowards fear exposure more than anything. He knows that if he pushes, he goes to prison for 10 years. If he stays away, he might just get away with bankruptcy. He will fade away." I hung up. I did not tell Elena about the letter. She did not need the noise. She needed the quiet to heal. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night, after dinner. We were sitting at the oak table we had built. The rain was beating against the windows, but inside, the wood stove was roaring, casting a warm, orange glow over the room. Elena had been quiet all evening. She was tracing the grain of the wood with her finger, over and over. "Dad," she said softly. "Yes, I am sorry." I put down my newspaper. "For what?" She looked up. Her eyes were full of tears, but she didn't look away. "For the party, for the way I treated you at the door. I saw you, you know. When the hostess stopped you, I saw you standing there in your tweed jacket." She took a shaky breath. "I was ashamed. I was ashamed of where I came from. I wanted to be one of them so badly, the people in the silk dresses. I thought if I erased you, I could be them. I let vanity cover my eyes like cataract. Vanity is a veneer," I said quietly. "It peels. I am sorry I let him steal from Leo," she sobbed. "I should have known. I signed papers without reading them. I was so lazy. I just wanted the lifestyle." She put her head in her hands. "I feel like I am broken, Dad, like I am warped. I don't know if I can ever be straight again." I stood up and walked over to the stove. I picked up a piece of white oak strip I had been steaming for a repair on a chair back. I took it out of the steam box. It was hot, pliable. I brought it to the table. "Look at this," I said. "This wood is straight, but I need it to curve to fit the chair. So I apply heat, I apply moisture, and I apply pressure." I bent the wood in my hands. It resisted, then yielded, forming a perfect arch. "But the reverse is also true," I said, looking at her. "If a board is warped, twisted by the weather, we can put it in the steam box. We heat it up. We force the moisture back in, and we clamp it straight. It hurts the wood. It is intense pressure, but when it cools, it stays straight. It remembers the new shape." I placed my hand on her head. "You were warped, Elena. The money, the ego, the fear, it twisted you. But last month, the work, The discipline, the pain. That was the steam box. You are under pressure now, but you are straightening out. You are not broken. You are just being reset. She grabbed my hand and held it against her cheek. She cried, but it was a quiet, cleansing cry. I want to be decent, she whispered. I just want to be decent. You are getting there, I said, one dovetail at a time. We sat there for a long time, the three of us. The storm raged outside, but the house held. The foundation was reinforced. The joints were tight. I still kept the checkbook locked in my safe. I still monitored her spending. Trust, like a good varnish, takes many coats and a lot of drying time. But as I looked at my daughter and my grandson, sitting at the table we had built with our own hands, I knew the worst was over. We were not rich. We were not elite. We were just a family of carpenters, learning to live with the grain. And that was enough. In structural engineering, you can calculate the load capacity of a beam on paper all day long. You can check the math. You can test the density of the material. You can run computer simulations. But you never really know if it will hold until you subject it to a live load. You have to put weight on it. You have to stress it until it bends, and see if it snaps or springs back, for nearly a year. Elena had been in the curing phase. She was working steady hours. She was paying rent to me, $500 a month, every first of the month, on the dot. She was gardening. She was present. But she had been safe inside the walls of my workshop, protected by my reputation and my physical presence. The load test came 3 days before Leo's 10th birthday. It was a Tuesday afternoon in June. The weather had turned warm. The Seattle gray finally breaking for a stretch of brilliant, blinding blue. I had driven to Elena's workplace, a logistics warehouse in the industrial district south of the city, to drop off a casserole for dinner. I had a late meeting with a client about a restoration job, so I wouldn't be home to cook. I parked my truck across the street, in the shadow of a container stack. I was checking the time, about to get out, when I saw the car. It was not a rental this time. It was a rusted, beat-up Honda Civic with a mismatched fender. It pulled into the visitor lot of the trucking company, aggressive and fast. The driver's door opened, and Marcus stepped out. He looked like a ghost of the man who had hosted the party at the Sapphire Lounge. He was thin, gaunt even. His suit was gone, replaced by jeans that were too loose and a polo shirt that had seen better days. His hair was thinning, and he had the nervous, twitchy energy of a street hustler. But he was not alone. The passenger door opened, and a woman stepped out. I recognized her instantly, even though I hadn't seen her in 5 years. It was Sylvia, Marcus's mother. If Marcus was a termite, Sylvia was the queen. She was a woman who wore costume jewelry like it was the crown jewels and treated waiters like indentured servants. She was holding a large, fake leather handbag and wearing sunglasses that covered half her face. They walked toward the glass doors of the office. Marcus was gesturing wildly, pointing at the building. Sylvia was nodding, her lips set in a thin, grim line. My hand went to the door handle of my truck. My fatherly instinct screamed at me to get out, to run across the street, to intercept them before they could reach Elena, to be the shield. I froze. I looked at my hand on the handle. It was shaking slightly. If I save her now, I thought, I will save her forever, and she will never know if she can save herself. I took my hand off the latch. I sat back in the seat. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the warehouse security desk, just in case things got physical. But I didn't hit send. I waited. This was the test. Through the large plate glass windows of the office, I had a front row seat. I saw Elena sitting at her desk, typing. She looked different than she had a year ago. She was wearing a simple blouse and slacks. Her hair was tied back in a practical ponytail. She looked focused. Then the door opened. Marcus and Sylvia burst in. The receptionist tried to stop them, but Sylvia pushed past her with the force of a tank. They marched straight to Elena's desk. I saw Elena look up. I saw the moment of recognition. I saw her shoulders stiffen. Marcus slammed his hands on her desk. I couldn't hear the words through the glass and the traffic noise, but I could read the body language. He was shouting. He was pointing a finger in her face. Sylvia was pacing behind him, waving a piece of paper. It looked like a legal document. Inside the truck, I rolled down my window, straining to catch any sound. A truck rumbled past, drowning out the world. When it cleared, I heard Marcus's voice carry over the asphalt. My rights. He is my son. You cannot keep him from me. He was playing the victim card. He was demanding visitation. Not because he cared about Leo, he hadn't sent a card or $1 in 11 months, but because he smelled money. He probably thought if he got custody, he could force access to the trust again. Elena stood up. She did not shrink. She did not cry. She did not look around for help. She walked around her desk and stood toe-to-toe with Marcus. She was smaller than him, but at that moment, she looked 10 feet tall. I saw her mouth moving. She was speaking calmly. She pointed to the door. Marcus grabbed her arm. My hand flew to the door handle again. That is it. Test over. But before I could open the door, Elena ripped her arm free. It was a violent, sharp movement. She stepped into his space, forcing him back. Then she reached into her desk drawer. She pulled out a folder, a thick manila folder. I smiled. It was the doomsday file. The copies of the bank records, the photos of the yacht, the affidavits from the investors he had defrauded. I had given it to her 6 months ago, telling her to keep it close. This is your shield, I had said. She slammed the folder onto the desk, right on top of Marcus's hands. She opened it. She pulled out the photo of him and Chloe on the boat. She held it up for Sylvia to see. Sylvia froze. She lowered her sunglasses. She looked at the photo, then at her son. Elena was talking now, her voice rising enough for me to hear snippets. Fraud. Federal prison. FBI. Marcus turned pale. He tried to grab the photo, but Elena snatched it back. She pointed a finger at Sylvia, then at the door. She was telling them to leave. She was telling them that she was not at the bank anymore. She was in the vault, and the vault was locked. Marcus looked at his mother. Sylvia looked at the file. Then, at the security guard who was finally approaching. Sylvia turned on her heel. She didn't wait for Marcus. She walked out the door, clutching her bag, and realized the game was up. She wasn't going to risk her own skin for a son who had been caught. Marcus stood there alone. He looked at Elena. He looked at the file. He looked small. Elena said one last thing. I saw her lips form the words perfectly. Get out. Marcus slumped. He turned and walked out the door, passing his mother on the sidewalk. They got into the rusted Civic and drove away, tires screeching, leaving a cloud of blue exhaust smoke behind them. Elena stood in the middle of the office. The other employees were staring. The security guard was asking if she was okay. She nodded. She smoothed her blouse. She sat back down at her desk and went back to typing. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. My chest ached with pride. It wasn't the pride of a father who has protected his child. It was the pride of a master builder who watches the scaffolding come down and sees the building stand on its own against the wind. The beam held. The load capacity was verified. I started my truck and drove away before she could see me. She didn't need to know I was watching. She needed to know she did it alone. That evening, I was in the kitchen when she came home. I was pretending to read the newspaper. She walked in, threw her keys in the bowl, and kicked off her shoes. "How was work?" I asked, not looking up. "Interesting," she said. She went to the fridge and poured a glass of water. Her hand was steady. "Oh, Marcus came by," she said casually. "And Sylvia." I lowered the paper. "Is that so? What did they want?" "Money," she said. "He threatened to sue for custody if I didn't pay him $10,000. He said he had rights." And what did you do? She took a sip of water and smiled. It was a smile I had never seen on her before. It was sharp, dangerous, and confident. I told him that his rights ended where his felonies began, she said. I showed him the file. I told him if he ever came near Leo again, I would personally mail copies to every federal agency in the alphabet. And he left. He ran away like a dog, she laughed. You know, Dad, I wasn't scared. I used to be terrified of him. I used to think he held the sky up. But today, he just looked like a man in a bad suit. He was always just a man in a bad suit, Elena, I said. You just needed to clean your glasses to see it. She walked over and kissed me on the cheek. Thanks for the file. I gave you the tool, I said. You did the work. Where is Leo? In the shop, I said. He is finishing the prototype for his chair. He wants to show you. We walked out to the workshop together. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the grass. Leo was at the small workbench I had built for him. He was wearing his apron, covered in dust. He was carefully sanding the leg of a small, wooden chair. It was rough, and the proportions were a bit off, but it stood on its own 4 legs. Mom, Grandpa, he shouted when he saw us. Look, it holds weight. He grabbed a stack of heavy woodworking books and piled them onto the seat of the chair. 1, 2, 3, 4. The chair creaked, but it didn't wobble, it was held. It is strong, Leo cheered. Elena walked over and hugged him, burying her face in his neck. It is very strong, baby. Just like us. Just like us, Leo repeated. I stood in the doorway, watching them. The load test was complete. The structure was sound. Grandpa, Leo said, looking up. Is it ready for my birthday party? Can we use it? It needs a finish, I said, walking over to inspect the joinery. Raw wood absorbs stains. We need to seal it, to protect it. What kind of finish? Leo asked. Tung oil, I said. It penetrates deep. It hardens inside the wood. It doesn't just sit on top like varnish. It becomes part of the chair. Like we did with the table, Elena said. Exactly. Can I do it? Leo asked. We all do it, I said. Tomorrow. We spent the day finishing the work. Then, on Saturday, we celebrate. 10 years old, Elena whispered, stroking Leo's hair. Double digits. A decade, I said. A good foundation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the workshop into twilight, I looked at the 3 of us. We were not the same people who had stood in that glittering, fake restaurant a year ago. We were worn. We were scared. We had calluses on our hands and gray in our hair. But we were real. Marcus and Sylvia were gone, blown away like sawdust in the wind. They were hollow, and hollow things cannot survive the storm. But we were solid. We were oak. Turn off the lights, Leo, I said. It is time for dinner. What are we having? He asked, flipping the switch. Stew, I said. And I think, maybe, pancakes for dessert. Leo's eyes widened in the dark. Pancakes at night. Why not? Elena laughed, her voice light and free. We make the rules now. We walked back to the house under the stars. The air was cool and smelled of pine. I took a deep breath. I had spent my life building things for other people. Cabinets for lawyers, tables for doctors, doors for houses I would never live in. But this family, walking beside me on the gravel path. This was a masterpiece. This was the work that would outlast me. I looked at the house. The lights were warm in the windows. It needed a new coat of paint, and the roof would need patching in the fall. But the bones were good. Happy early birthday, Leo, I whispered. Thanks, Grandpa, he said, slipping his small, rough hand into mine. I squeezed it. He squeezed back. The load held. The sun that hit my backyard on that Saturday afternoon in June was not the filtered, artificial light of the Sapphire Lounge. It was real sunlight, unfiltered and honest, warming the grass and casting long, sharp shadows across the 2 acres of land I had tended for 40 years. It was Leo's 10th birthday. Exactly 1 year had passed since I stood in the rain outside a glass wall, watching my family disintegrate. Today, there were no glass walls. There were no bouncers. There was no guest list. I stood by the smoker, a 50-gallon steel drum I had welded myself 20 years ago, tending to a brisket that had been slow cooking for 12 hours over hickory wood. The air smelled of smoke, caramelized meat, and the sweet scent of fresh-cut grass. It was the smell of home. I looked out over the yard. It was full, but not crowded. There were no zoning commissioners here. There were no foreign investors looking for a tax haven. There was Frank, sitting in a lawn chair with a cold beer, arguing good-naturedly about baseball with Jim Miller, the police officer who had once threatened to arrest me and now came over for poker every other Friday. There were 5 boys from Leo's class, running through the sprinkler in their shorts, screaming with the pure, unadulterated joy that only 10-year-olds possess. And there was Elena. She was standing by the picnic table, the same oak table we had restored together, laying out paper plates. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that said Southside Logistics. She was laughing at a joke told by one of her colleagues, a burly forklift driver named Davina, who had brought a potato salad that weighed 5 pounds. Elena looked tired. Yes, she had worked a double shift on Thursday to pay for the balloons and the soda. But she looked solid. She looked like someone who stood on her own 2 feet, not someone propped up by a credit line. "Hey, Dad," she called out, waving a pair of tongs. "The corn is ready. Do you want me to pull it?" "Give it 5 more minutes," I called back. "Let the sugars caramelize." She nodded and went back to talking to Davina. I watched her. A year ago, she would have panicked if a caterer was 5 minutes late. Now, she understood that good things take time. Leo ran up to me, soaking wet, his hair plastered to his forehead. Grandpa, did you see I jumped over the entire sprinkler?" "I saw, buddy," I said, handing him a towel. "You cleared it by a foot. Good elevation." "Is it time for cake yet?" he asked, hopping from one foot to the other. "Meat first," I said. "Then cake, then gifts," he groaned. But it was a happy groan, and he ran back to his friends. We ate. We sat on the grass and on folding chairs, balancing paper plates on our knees. The brisket was tender enough to cut with a plastic spoon. The conversation was loud and overlapping. We talked about the Mariners, about the price of lumber, about the weather. No one talked about status. No one dropped names. We just shared a meal. After the cake, a simple chocolate sheet cake Elena had baked herself. Slightly lopsided, but tasting better than any fondant-covered sculpture. It was time for the gifts. Leo sat on the back porch steps. His friends gave him Lego sets and comic books. Davina gave him a baseball mitt. Frank gave him a $50 savings bond. Because Frank is old school. Then, I brought out my gift. It was a wooden box, made of curly maple with walnut splines. I had spent 3 weeks making the box alone. The finish was so smooth it felt like satin. The yard went quiet. Leo looked at the box. He ran his hand over the lid. He knew wood now. He knew that curly maple was rare and hard to work with. "Open it," I said softly. He lifted the heavy lid. It moved on brass hinges I had recessed by hand. Inside, nestled in custom-cut velvet-lined foam, was a set of tools. They were not toys. They were not the cheap, stamped steel tools you buy at a big box store. There was a block plane, cast from ductile iron with a cryogenically treated blade. There was a set of 4 bench chisels, their handles turned from hornbeam. There was a Japanese pull saw with teeth as fine as a razor, and in the center, a heavy brass marking gauge. I had engraved the brass collar of every single tool. Leo Johnson. Leo gasped. He didn't reach for them immediately. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "Grandpa," he whispered, these are real." "They are professional grade," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "They will last you a lifetime, Leo, if you take care of them. They will build houses for your grandchildren." "Can I keep them?" he asked. "In the shop." "They are yours," I said. "You keep them in your own chest. You sharpen them. You oil them. A master builder has his own kit. You are a builder now, Leo." He stood up and walked over to me. He didn't say anything. He just buried his face in my apron, wrapping his arms around my waist. I held him tight, smelling the chlorine from the sprinkler water and the smoke from the fire. "Thank you," he mumbled into my chest. "Best gift ever." Elena was watching us, tears streaming down her face. She wiped them away with the back of her hand and smiled. "Wait," I said, releasing Leo but keeping a hand on his shoulder. "There is one more thing." I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. I motioned for Elena to come closer. She stepped up to the porch, looking curious. "This is about trust," I said. Elena stiffened slightly. The old reflex. Money was always the trigger. "I dissolved the cash assets," I announced to the small family circle. "The money I recovered from Marcus, and the liquidation of the land assets after the foreclosure, it is not going into a savings account for Leo to access when he is 18. Elena looked at me, confused. "Okay, so what did you do with it?" "I created an endowment," I said. "I set up a legal entity called the Leo Johnson Makerspace Trust." I handed the envelope to Elena. She opened it and pulled out the charter. "Leo," I said, looking down at my grandson, "when you turn 18, you do not get a check. You do not get a pile of cash to buy a fast car or go on vacation. What you get is a funded workshop. The trust will pay for rent, insurance, and machinery for any business you want to start. As long as you build something with your hands, it pays for trade school. It pays for materials, but it never, ever pays for lifestyle." I looked at Elena. "It is capital for production, not consumption. He can build a furniture business. He can be an architect. He can be a mechanic. The trust will back him. But he has to do the work. If he stops working, the funding stops." I waited. This was the final test. I was telling my daughter that her son would never be a trust fund baby. He would have to work, just like we did. Elena read the document. She traced the lines of text. Then she looked up. Her eyes were shining. "It is perfect," she said. She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask if there was a loophole. "He does not need free money," Elena said, looking at her son with fierce pride. "He needs a future. This gives him a future." She reached into her pocket. "I have something for you, Dad," she said. She handed me a small, folded piece of cardstock. It was handmade. The edges were a bit rough. She had cut it herself. On the front, she had glued a small shaving of wood, one of the curly shavings from the plane when we smoothed the dining table. I opened it. Her handwriting was neat, devoid of the loops and flourishes she used to use. "Dear Dad, thank you for not catching me when I fell. Thank you for letting me hit the floor so I could find out where the ground was. And most of all, thank you for sanding down my rough edges. I know I was a hard piece of wood to work with. I love you, Elena." I closed the card. I felt a tear track through the soot on my cheek. I nodded to her. It was the only acknowledgement I could give without breaking down completely. "I am going to get another hot dog," Frank announced loudly, breaking the emotional tension like only Frank could. "All this crying is making me hungry," we laughed. The moment released, drifting up into the summer sky like the smoke from the BBQ, as the sun began to set, turning the sky a deep, bruised purple. I stood back and watched them. Leo was showing his new saw to his friends, explaining the difference between a rip cut and a cross cut. Elena was helping Davina pack up the leftovers. I took a sip of my iced tea. I thought about the concept of finishing. In woodworking, the finish is not just about making things look pretty. It is about protection. You apply varnish, oil, or shellac to seal the fibers. You create a barrier against the moisture, the dirt, the rot. For years, I thought love meant giving. I thought it meant writing checks, saying yes, smoothing the path. I thought I was polishing my family. But I wasn't. I was leaving them raw, exposed to the elements. While I took all the hits myself, I was wrong. Real love is the varnish. It is the hard, protective layer of boundaries. It is saying no. It is demanding respect. It is forcing the wood to stand up to the weather. By closing my wallet, by locking the gate, by holding the chisel against the threat. I had finally finished them. I had sealed them against the rot. "Dad," Elena called out. "We are going to light the sparklers." "I am coming," I said. I looked at the camera. Or rather, I looked through the lens of my own memory at you, the person listening to the story. You might be sitting there, feeling like you are being erased. Maybe you were left off a guest list. Maybe your children treat you like an ATM. Maybe you feel like you are just the scaffolding, supporting everyone else's beautiful facade while you stand in the mud. Don't let them do it. Do not let anyone tell you that you are not on the list of your own life. You are the architect. You are the builder. And if the people inside the house you built do not respect the foundation, you have every right to evict them. Self-preservation is not selfishness. It is structural integrity. If you collapse, the whole house goes down. So reinforce your walls. Lock your doors. And if you find rot, cut it out. Do it now, before the roof caves in. I walked back to the group. Leo handed me a sparkler. I took out my lighter and struck the flame. The chemicals caught, sizzling and popping, sending showers of golden light into the twilight. "Happy birthday, Leo," I said. "Make a wish, Grandpa," he shouted, waving his sparkler in circles, writing his name in the air. "I do not need to wish," I said, watching the sparks reflect in my daughter's smiling eyes. "I have already built it." The sparks faded, but the light remained. We stood there, 3 generations of Johnsons, firmly planted on the ground, while the summer night settled around us like a warm, heavy blanket. And tomorrow we had work to do. There was a chair that needed oiling, and I couldn't wait to get started. Thank you for listening to my story. It has been a long journey from the rain-soaked pavement outside that restaurant to the warmth of my own backyard, and I am grateful you walked it with me. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a workshop in Ohio, a kitchen in London, or maybe on your commute in Sydney? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of standing up for yourself, please hit that subscribe button for bittersweet revenge. Like this video to help us grow, and smash that hype button so we can share these lessons with more people who need to hear them. Until next time, keep your edges sharp and your boundaries strong.